Immoral relations. Now we're checking to see who's old here. Okay, good, we're good. We're going to get into some talk here that's going to be awkward sometimes. This is all going to be based on Leviticus chapter 18. And the whole chapter is dedicated to immoral relationships. And God goes line after line, verse after verse, listening, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And those things are all, don't have this kind of relationship with this person. But there's more than that to it. There's more depth to that, and we're going to explore that depth. And in our society, those used to be the very basis for marriage legitimacy tests. There was a time when you got a marriage license, you had to make sure that this wasn't your cousin, and there were a bunch of things that sometimes they would do blood tests. I don't think any state does that anymore. But there was a time when the laws actually required that you conform to what was the Bible law at that time. And so now society and even church people view these laws in terms of genetics. And the idea behind the law, they say, is that it reduces the odds of inbreeding abnormalities that can happen. But God doesn't just view it that way. He sees more to that. God has a bigger picture view. And you'll see that in these. He'll say, this thing is an abomination. It's just truly offensive to me, and I don't want you doing it. So it's not just about genetics or other things. It's really about God's attitude to what those things are. And so we're going to get an insight into how God sees these things. And we're also going to see that translations matter. And that was kind of surprising when I was doing both of these lessons, is that in the first one, there was that section where the word child could be, there were 3 different words being used, but in English, they're all being translated into the same word, child, or children. And they actually had nuances to them that were important to understanding the passage. And we're going to see that here as well. Translations can matter in circumstances, and we're going to get right to that here. So what's the topic here? In Leviticus 18, what are we really talking about these immoral relationships? Well, when you compare what the NASB says to the NIV, you see a big difference. NASB says, none of you shall approach any blood relative of his to uncover nakedness. And then NIV says, no one is to approach any close relative to have sexual relations. Now, sexual relations are different from uncovering nakedness. What is really the intent of the Bible here? And it turns out that the one that's correct is NASB, and we'll get into that more as we go along about why it's really talking about nakedness and not a sexual relationship. So as with the law, the message is really spiritual, and so behind all of this, these rules about don't have this relationship, you shouldn't indulge these. If you have these desires in you, you shouldn't indulge these desires. Every one of us have bodies that have bad desires in them. We have different desires. Some people are attracted to something they shouldn't be, and other people are attracted to a different thing they shouldn't be. And so if you have these kind of desires for these relationships in your body, when your body says, ooh, I want to do that, you have to say, no, we're not going to do that. So if you have these desires, you need to control these desires. And if you don't indulge it, you won't do it. And if you do indulge it, you've already done it. Jesus talked about adultery that way. If you've already committed adultery in your heart, if you've considered it and indulged yourself in it in your mind. So when these verses say none of you, it's referring to men. And that's another thing that we're going to see in this chapter is almost exclusively it's talking about men don't have this kind of relationship with this woman. And there's one exception that we'll point out. And the reason for this is that men are given the responsibility for saying no in these situations. God doesn't say why, but it's not hard to imagine why. The men had the authority and the power, especially back then, to command women to do things. And that might have been the situation here. So if a woman relative is initiating this relationship you shouldn't be having, it falls on the man to be the one who says, no, I'm not going to do that. So it's still wrong for both to do it, but it's in the responsibility of the man to be the one who says no. And what you see here also that was different between them is where Leviticus 18:6 was saying sexual relationships in NIV, we see that uncovered nakedness is the word that the Bible actually uses. In the most direct translations, it's always uncovered nakedness. And so this may be, as I was talking about before, they're talking about causing or forcing a woman to become naked for you because that's what you want her to do. And so that, and we'll see that makes sense when we see some more of this. So the topic here is really about uncovering nakedness at first, and then the topics are going to shift a little bit, and we'll see that. So the first thing it says, and this is kind of an interesting case, is it's talking about men not having a relationship where you uncover the nakedness of your mother. And it says that causes your father to become naked as well. And that gets lost in the translation too. NIV does it in a different way that really loses the message, the value that's in there. And so NASB says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, that is, the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother, you are not to uncover her nakedness. And then NIV says, do not dishonor your father. That's quite a bit different from uncovering the nakedness. Dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother, do not have relations with her. And so NIV has kind of simplified it without really understanding what it was about. But it really is about the idea that making your mother naked, so you can see her naked, makes your father naked. And that seems like a strange idea. But it happens within you. It changes the way you look at your father because of what you've done here. And still talking to a mature audience, probably the universal experience that every teenager goes through is coming to that realization that his parents have a sexual relationship, and all of a sudden, ooh, whoa, ew. and so that changes you. When you go through that stage of development as a teenager, suddenly you have a whole different attitude towards your parents. And I think that's really what's being described here is if you desire to and cause your mother to be naked so that you can see her, you're getting into that relationship that you're not supposed to be in. And Genesis really talks about that. It says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So making one naked is essentially making the other one naked as well. And so, as I was saying, this kind of changes the way you see your dad after you've seen your mom this way.
You might have to put an R rating later on.
That's right. We haven't had to do a video like this before, but we're doing it now. Okay, so I'm going to summarize all the rest of that. And as I said, there are verse after verse after verse saying, don't have a relationship with this woman or this woman or this woman or this woman. It goes way down the line. And I made a list here so we can just kind of skip through them. In fact, from this list, I've removed all the cases that we can't run into where multiple wives are involved. And so this isn't the full list. So these are the verse numbers and the list of the people that are talked about as wives and aunts and other things that you can't, or you shouldn't be having a sexual or a uncovering nakedness relationship. Let me make that clear. I'm not going to spend any more time on it than that. You can come back to this slide later on if you want to. Okay, so once it's gone through that whole list of don't uncover the nakedness of these women, the topic changes, and it changes to actual intercourse. And so that's part of the reason that we know that the first ones were not about sexual relationships as the NIV was translating it. They're about uncovering nakedness. And the wording in the Hebrew changes too. And you see it in the translation in NASB, but not in NIV. I'll explain how the translation changes in just a second here. So NASB says, you shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. And then NIV keeps using the sexual relations word as though there's been no difference in the Hebrew, but there is. And it says, do not have sexual relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. And so this change in the Hebrew is lost in the NIV translation here. What you do see in the actual Hebrew is the words were uncovered nakedness for those 20 or whatever verses beforehand. And now what you see is lie with. And so it uses a different word in the Hebrew to describe the situation. And so this does make it clear that when it was talking about uncovered nakedness before, it was really talking about nakedness and not about a sexual relationship. And this really comes down to who is your neighbor here. And Jesus talked about that same idea. These verses are talking about not having intercourse with your neighbor's wife. And Jesus said your neighbor is everybody. And so it really rules out anybody else's wife. Okay, so the intercourse section is much smaller, and it's very interesting in who's in this list. And so I'll just go through these verses quickly here. It says, you shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife, this is from the NASB, of course, to be defiled with her. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. That's talking about homosexuality. It is an abomination. Also, you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. So those are the 4 cases that are given. And those are actually very interesting, and we're going to break down a couple of them. The first one is Molech. Who's Molech? Anybody know the story on Molech and how you used to worship Molech back then?
Sacrifice children into the fire.
Sacrificing children. So in a list of intercourse that you should not have, why is Molech there? Well, it seems kind of strange, but think about it. Let's read that verse again. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So why is this in the intercourse section? What is God telling us here by putting it in with the intercourse section? Anybody got any ideas? This is a tough one.
Just as bad as the previous ones?
Well, or yeah, maybe even worse depending on how you look at it. But it's more to it than that. And again, this comes down to translations and what translators are doing. So in all of these, as I said, the other 3 of them, it talks about lying with an animal or a person or a male or those sort of things. And in this one, the word offspring, the Hebrew word is actually the word for seed or sowing. And so it's really talking about giving your infant to Molech to be sacrificed is giving away your seed in the same way that you give away your seed in intercourse. Does that make sense that way? This will have to be R-rated. Yeah, maybe not on Facebook at all. They might just block it. And so that's where the connection is. Don't give away your seed to these people. And Molech that's why Molech is in the list, is that you're giving away your seed. And remember that the Bible uses seed that way quite a bit. Jesus is talked about as the seed that is coming, the promise of Abraham, the seed that was promised to Abraham. And so in Bible times, that was very common to use the word seed to refer to living people. And so it shouldn't be a shock to us here, but a lot of translations change that into words that are easier for us to understand, and we lose those basic meanings that we need to have from their time. And of course, animals are mentioned here. It says, also you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before any animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. And so what we see here is the first mention of telling a woman not to have a particular kind of relationship, in this case an intercourse kind of relationship. And so that's different here, and I think there's a reason for that, and that's because in all the other cases there was a man there who was the one who was responsible for saying no. But here with a woman and an animal, it's only the woman who is the one who is saying no, so it specifically says that a woman should not do this also, just as a man should not. And notice perversion, and we've seen other words like that used to describe these acts that God says are completely reprehensible to him. And perversion means the alteration of something to a distortion or corruption of what was first intended. So what we're talking about here is that you're doing something with your giving seed that was never intended. That's not the way it's supposed to be, says God. And so that includes, as we've seen, animals, homosexuality, sacrifices to gods, and your neighbor's wife. Those are the 4 that are on that list.
Homosexuality has become more acceptable in the new church today. And one of the ways that I noticed that they got around it was they said that the affection that David's son had,
Yeah.
I forgot what his name is.
Jonathan and David, yeah.
And they interpreted it to be homosexuality, which of course was not.
No, of course not.
I can't imagine God blessing that, blessing David and everything else, even though there was a perversion involved, But yeah, it's become more acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
When I've spoken on it, there was some people that didn't like that at all, that I brought that up,
Yeah.
But it's just in the Bible. We got to talk about it,
Yeah, there was even something very interesting that. But this month is Pride Month, right? That's
Oh,
officially
yeah.
Pride Month. And so a lot of sports teams participate in that, and one baseball team, the Tampa Bay Rays, they all had a patch. They did a patch for, they all wore in a game. Well, about 4 of the players removed the patch. And of course, they were blasted, and one of them came out and spoke and said, look, it's just a biblical thing. We love them, whatever, we don't hate anybody, there's no hatred, we love them all, but we cannot, in good conscience, wear this patch with our biblical beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's all, but we still love them. And they were just blasted.
Of course.
Demonized, basically. So.
I thought it was ironic that this monkeypox virus has been occurring more often, and especially now in Pride Month, because I think, as you might have read, that it's transmitted through homosexual relations. And to me, that's just God kind of, revving up the desire to stop this, perversion and so forth. He's, as they become more lax, God has become more strict, with those things. So that monkeypox is nothing to laugh about. That's a horrible disease to have. All these boils that go all
Yeah,
over
it doesn't
you.
look good, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's painful, but it sure looks awful.
Thank you for clarifying all this too.
Yeah, this doesn't get preached for obvious reasons very often, and it gets left out. And you're right. Even in Church of God Seventh Day, when you go on their web page and look what they say about homosexuality, they have an odd distinction there. They talk about not supporting homosexuality in the flesh. Why would you make that distinction? I don't know. I don't get where they're going.
Well, I think where they're going is, it's okay as long as you don't display it or act on it.
You think that's where they're headed?
I absolutely believe that. Look, it's okay. You're gay, but you have to. But don't display it. Don't display it, and don't act on the urges that you have.
Okay.
So I mean, that's what I would think. That's first thing.
Well, that wouldn't be biblical either.
Well, it seems to me that if that is the case, and it probably is, I would say that we are not making a distinction between spiritual sin and actual physical sin. But Jesus did.
Yeah.
He said, "You have heard it said that you should not kill your brother. But I say to you, if you hate your brother in your own heart, it's as if you're killing your brother," and so forth and so on. So yeah, to God, there's no difference.
Yeah.
So if you have homosexual tendencies and desires in your heart and have not addressed them, then you are not converted, and you are still a sinner, and you will be judged by that.
Yeah, and he said the same thing about cheating. That's not the right word. I lost the word. Anyway, relations out of marriage, adultery. That's the word I'm looking for. And yeah, he said the exact thing.
Maybe the Lord wanted to block that from your mind.
Maybe I'm tired.
Well, just in case you don't know, in Canada, I don't know if you heard about this, but they were talking about, or at least they introduced it, passing a bill or some type of law to make it legal to either marry your animal or, I mean, just
Yes,
ridiculously stupid thing. I'm sorry, there is no other word for
it is.
Yeah, some cultures that they've already, in other countries, I have heard them marry their pet. So that was weird. I don't know how far they take it after that. I don't even want to think about that one.
Yeah, it's interesting that things that are obviously yuck, that's where the evil one takes them, and they make it acceptable.
And it's sad that, like, the modern church, at least the modern American church, they don't like to talk about these things. Oh, because it hurts my ears. Oh, my beautiful ears. Stop. You need to know what's out there so that you can prepare yourself and your family.
Yeah, it's
to deal
true.
with this.
Yeah. It's not an easy topic to talk about, obviously.
It's not. But how are you going to fight the good fight if you don't know what you're fighting?
Exactly. Yeah.